Hello again, Gary Stearman with another Prophecy in the News Daily Update, Thursday, the 10th of June. And despite what you might hear in the Western press, Gaza is not starving. You know, that attention that was focused on the blockade of humanitarian supplies from Turkey made it appear that Gaza was being deprived of the supplies that it needed for everyday operation. Not true. Would you believe that the Israelis during the year 2009 and right up to the present are allowing all kinds of humanitarian and business aid to flow into Gaza? From Israel Today, dated Thursday, June 10th, we have this report. The report talks about those items that have been allowed into Gaza by the Israelis. On the health front, 4,883 tons of medical equipment and medicines entered Gaza, and that's just in the year 2009 alone. They don't talk about 2010. And again, the Israelis are allowing humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. Israel continues to supply electricity to Gaza from its electrical power plant in Ashkelon. Now, the Israelis could shut off the power to Gaza, which has declared that it wants to destroy Israel. I suppose Israel would have every right to shut off the power, but it doesn't. It continues to allow electricity to flow. On the communications front, the Gazans were allowed 45 truckloads of communications equipment recently at the request of the Palestinian Authority, and Israel supplied it. Water and sewage. 95 truckloads of equipment for water and sewage programs to Gaza came from Israel. The private sector, businessmen from Gaza are regularly allowed to cross the border to do business. And 77% of the contents of trucks sent into Gaza in 2009 were for private sector interchange. Business is going on. And by the way, that includes ranching and cattle raising and farming. 10,871 head of cattle crossed the Gaza-Israel border for the purpose, of course, of sending cattle to market. So despite what you might hear, Israel is indeed allowing not only humanitarian aid, but business to continue as usual with a country that has sworn to wipe them out. To me, that's an amazing, amazing story. Over 1.1 billion Israeli shekels were transferred to Gaza in 2009 to fund salaries and activities of international organizations there. And that came, of course, from Israel. Humanitarian aid, 141,000 tons of humanitarian aid were allowed to cross into Gaza. So if you hear that the Israelis are those cruel people who are not allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza, think again. You know, it's fascinating. A United States House of Representatives well-known figure in the House, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, now he's a Democrat from Maryland, issued a statement this week reminding the world that the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip could be ended in a moment, quickly. And if only Hamas took a few simple steps that would be considered quite reasonable ordinarily. And quoting Steny Hoyer, he says, let's be clear, Hamas could end the blockade at any time by recognizing Israel's right to exist, by renouncing violence, and by releasing Gilad Shalit. Now, Gilad Shalit is an Israeli soldier who's being held hostage in Gaza and has for several years. The congressman was highly critical of those who condemned Israel over its raid on so-called humanitarian aid, the flotilla to Gaza last week, saying Israel, and rightfully so, invoked its right to self-defense. The final note on this, and to me, it's the result of what happens when the United States relaxes its aid and support for another country, specifically Israel. We have recently let Israel know in no uncertain terms that we are backing away from them on the international front. And what has happened is that the Turks now have turned eastward. After nearly a century of being allied with Western powers, the Turks now have taken the heavily Islamized direction. They are becoming more and more radical, and they are siding with Iran. And as a result, here is a UK Guardian article that's fascinating to me. Support for Turkey is at an all-time high in the Arab world. The last time Turkish flags were carried through the streets of the Middle Eastern capitals was during the First World War, as people took to the streets in continued support for the Ottoman Sultan Caliphate against Western powers. That's practically 100 years ago, folks. And now Israel's relations with Ankara are defunct. Not too long ago, Turkey was a tourist destination for Israeli travelers. Not anymore, because the government of Recep Erdogan has turned toward Iran and toward the Arab caliphates of the East, and saying, so long to the West, we're no longer interested in the alliance that we've had with you for bordering on a century now. And the Turks continue to make war against Israel using the Western media as a propaganda front. I find all this absolutely astounding, and I find it amazing that the Bible says this about Turkey in the last days. And I've mentioned this earlier in the week, but it's worth mentioning again. Turkey is very well mentioned in Ezekiel 38 as an ally of both Iran and Russia, which we find in the news today. Ezekiel 38:6 says, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Now that house of Togarmah is the ancient name for the territory we now call Turkey. It's fascinating the way things are shaping up. Bible prophecy is becoming a living reality, and I urge you to continue to watch the gentleman that we call Recep Erdogan, Prime Minister of Turkish Parliament. Erdogan is now a key figure in the Middle East, and he is siding very prominently with the Russians and with the Iranians, just as the Bible said he would. Well, it's fascinating to watch. We'll be back tomorrow with another Prophecy in the News daily update. Gary Stearman reminding you, as always, to keep looking up.